Hey, my name is Kristi Leigh, and today we're talking with Elias Dummer. You're going to hear his voice. He sounds familiar, probably looks familiar from the City Harmonic days. Their song Manifesto is like super classic, timeless song, and others like Holy Wedding Day. And I love that the music he's making now, you still get some of that grit and drive, potent, clear lyrics with a heart of exhortation. I know I'm going to keep on going here on my... I mean, these are some of the things I love about Elias. And I want to say these before we talk, because I think it's important to get this set up that I'm talking with someone who operates in exhortation, who also edifies, who comes from a revelatory kind of approach to these lyrics are really important. And that's something the City Harmonic has always done really well. There's nothing lost in Elias going solo. In fact, it feels like we're just getting more concentrated, but then also more diversity in the music. So it's going to be a fun conversation. And I am so thrilled that we're going to talk about worship and the brain.
Yes.
I'm loving that. So Elias, that
conversation.
That's my really, really long intro. Thanks for still staying there.
But no, that's great.
Hey, Elias Dummer.
Yeah,
good to have
how
you.
You doing? Yeah, no,
really
thanks,
good.
Thanks, Kristi. Yeah.
So Elias is in his studio, right? I'm loving the red chair in the corner.
Thank you. It's actually my dog's chair, but I kicked him out just in case he decided that a neighbor wasn't worth hearing. So
that is so. I see the chair. I'm thinking that looks like a worn chair, like where the songs are written, but it's where the dog.
It's where
the dog is taking it over.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I write at, actually, funny enough, mostly the same piano. When I write at the piano, it's mostly the same piano that like Manifesto and Holy Wedding Day were written at. It's this old spinet that sits in our living room and is horribly out of tune. Like it can't hold a tune anymore. And my family wants me to get rid of it, but I'm trying to decide if I should.
It doesn't sound like you should.
Yeah.
But
no, the thing is, it sounds like I should.
Sounds like you. Yeah.
It's pretty bad sounding. But yeah, no, I still end up kind of starting a lot of writing there. And of course on guitar or whatever as well. But
get your wife to paint it a color. We were just talking about how much Elias's wife has, this love of paint colors and everything. Maybe she could just paint it something cool. I don't restring it and even try to bring it back to pristine condition.
Just ruin it.
Yeah, it's like giving a piano Botox or something.
It's funny. We did one of our records with City Harmonic at Ben Folds' studio at RCAB here in Nashville. And there was one piano. He had a really, really big hit way back in the day, probably his biggest hit. And it was written on that piano. And the piano is in horrible condition. And it was basically unplayable. But we used it for one moment of one song on the album Heart. Because we just couldn't resist. So we used this horribly tuned piano for that, and that was it. But yeah, but it's kind of fun that we got to, play the piano that was on that song. Kind of thing.
Yeah. It's worth it. It's worth it for the story.
Totally. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I probably choose that way all the time. Maybe for better or worse.
I get it. Yeah. You got to use those sparingly, but then you have those in your pocket. So it totally makes sense. Definitely. Exactly. Well, catch us up on a little bit of what you've been doing since the days of the City Harmonic. I know you've had some solo stuff, but give us the whole, catch up to speed story.
Yeah. Well, the City Harmonic ended in 2017 in what is quite possibly the most boring breakup story of all time. We were just sort of thinking, we're good friends still. And, without throwing anyone under the bus, so I want to be really clear, I'm not trying to judge how other people do what they do. We sort of had this moment of going, hey, maybe we've said together the things that are important for us to say together. And if we continue to move forward, it'll either be completely pragmatic, like, Eli writes songs and the rest of us be the band and we just keep going because we can. It would have required a major change for us to have continued forward in terms of what we were going to do creatively. And so we kind of came to the choice to close the book ourselves instead of, just linger on for practical purposes. We were started out of vision and we wanted to continue out of vision. And so we ended the band. And we're still friends as a result and still talk and all of that. But after that, I sort of had this moment of, okay, well, what am I going to do next? And it was actually Josh from the City Harmonic who was like, no, you've got to do solo stuff. Like, keep going. So I said, yeah, you're right. I should. So I started working on a record almost right away. Shortly after shortly after the band broke up, I had a church that I helped to plant here. Well, actually, it was in and around the time that the band was breaking up. I had a church that I helped to plant here in town, and I was involved in that until just very recently. And we're still at that church, but just not on staff at this point now, because it's grown, and I've trained up worship leaders, and the job that I was there to do, I think, was done. And so it's sort of the same sort of thing. I did the thing, and now I'm moving on. And so here, really today, hanging out with family. I'm involved in a few things musically and writing solo releases, and just now since 2017 starting to tour again and travel and lead worship around the country, and once borders open up, at least the world.
There you go.
Yeah.
Feel like you are on an on-ramp to something. Things do feel like in this moment where we're talking, things are speeding up, and there's a lot of material that is coming, and it's really urgently coming from your heart. And so I'm excited to talk about some of those things. I first, before we get to the new stuff, there was a song you released a year ago, right? So this would be a few months after the global pandemic began.
Yes.
Called A Time to Dance, which is... I just get a kick out of it. Of course, if you listen to it, a very Ecclesiastes kind of a sound, but I would love to know more about this song and why it came out at that exact time.
Yeah, it is a very tongue-in-cheek song. Well, maybe, I don't know. It's kind of tongue-in-cheek. So yeah, it is, describing it feels embarrassing. It is, frankly, a disco tune, which sounds way weirder than it actually sounds when you hear it, but it's a disco tune based on Ecclesiastes 3.
Okay,
so,
that is the way you just said that. That was funny.
Yeah, right. Well, so it's like, obviously, if you're not familiar with the text, it's there's a time for this and a time for that and all of these things. And I think at the moment, I had written that song actually years earlier. We'd almost included it on like 2 City Harmonic records. And then we never did. So, and then I almost included it on my record, and then I didn't. And so there was sort of this moment of like, this feels like the right time when everybody's dealing with all kinds of rich emotions and, the tensions of what was going on, I think, in the world at the time, and in many ways is still going on. And there was sort of this sense of like, there are seasons that are really hard. There are seasons that are great. There are seasons that hurt, and there are, and some little turn of phrase, but thank God there's a time to dance. Like, because in the midst of that thick trouble, it's like, well, there's this, we have this. And I think, a lot of churches were meeting at home, and people were trying to do church over Zoom. And there was all of these, like, what do I do with myself when I'm staring at a TV? And so this is a song that was kind of just shamelessly intended to get people moving and maybe with a little chuckle while they're at it.
I love it. I love that you went, and really it's more subtly disco than what the
it
way
probably
that
sounds more hilarious than it sounds.
Yeah, the way you just described it, I'm picturing King Solomon at a disco, with the platform shoes, bell bottoms, and everything.
Yeah. Well, which would be quite the sight, actually.
I'm liking what the theater of my mind is coming up with and all of that. But yeah, it's a really cool song, and I think we needed some of those things. There were a lot of songs that, like The Blessing, for example, that were at one end of the spectrum that we needed in that serious way, and then we also needed some things that could kind of just unlock our hearts in a different fashion. Not everything can make you cry. You've got to be encouraged in a different kind of beat. So
totally. Yeah.
I really like that one, and a belated happy 1-year birthday to A Time to Dance.
Oh, well,
check that song out if you haven't heard it yet. But fast forward to the latest song from Elias, and it's called Expecation. This song, first, let's just start with the stuff that maybe won't take as long. I would love to know about the album artwork or the song artwork with this red ribbon all over you. Is that just cool art, or is that symbolic in some way?
No, the album art, when it is finished and comes out later this year. So what we're doing with the singles is each single has its own kind of quadrant. There are lyrics from the song and symbolic ideas that are similar to lyrics in each song that are in each of those quadrants. So when the album is done, there's going to be something like 25 or 30 illustrations that are all directly drawn from the album that make up the album art.
Really cool. Oh, I
Yeah.
can't wait to see that.
Yeah, so like you'll notice in the cover of Expecation, there's a line in the third verse that's like, "Come with faith by a thread," and so you'll see there's literally a spool of thread, and it's intertwined with all these other things. So, I mean, the album is all across the board in that song as well. Is really about trying to figure out what does it look like to be the church and to do this thing together and to write songs for the church and to be a faithful, God-loving Christian in a time when so many things that the church has messed up are so visible and so and hurtful to people. And that's what a lot of people are processing, right? So I think that's reality. That's the reality we live in, even if we want to bury our head in the sand. That's the world we live in. And so really there's in the artwork, there's that sense in which like, part of it is coming apart in a sense, but it's being held together by the Holy Spirit, and red also the blood of Christ. So there's symbolism at this album, and this artwork are both just drenched in symbolism.
I mean, it was either something deep or that you got twisted up and ribbon at the disco doing a time to dance.
That's right.
I mean, so can't wait for that coming later this year. Maybe later this fall, we'll see. But the work volume 2. And I can't wait to hear what you have to sing, because I know that it comes from a place of prayer in this crazy season.
Yeah.
There's and if you had said at the, let's say, February of 2020, if you had said, songs for the church, things the church needs to hear, I don't know that it would have rang as many bells as you say it now. And we go, okay, yeah, there's a real opportunity there. So to do it in song is a cool way to do it.
Yeah, I hope so. That's definitely the hope. I mean, I feel like there's a temptation to in our songs and in how we worship together, there's a temptation to just move on as if like the moment is over. And I think the reality is we actually have a lot of work to do. And I've long thought, and this kind of connects, funny enough, to the worship in the brain thing, but I've long thought that worship is really a discipleship act. Like when we sing, we're changed, and we're changed, yes, by our encounter in a sense with the Holy Spirit, but even just mechanically, like we are training our brain to remember the things that matter to us. And so, that's why so many of the Psalms are Psalms of lament and at least both joyous and troubling or troubled. And because it's a very human songbook, and I think it's probably important for us as we write these songs that they're authentic and sincere to us, but also that they're human and connected to the dirt that we walk on, because that's some part of what we're doing is N.T. Wright's this theologian that I like. He talks about worship being us gathering up the songs of creation and the world to direct them to God and reflect God's image back out into the world. And so like, if that's at the heart of what it means to do worship, then frankly, we've got to write songs that reflect that, and Expecation really was just like a call to worship. I call it a call to worship for the rest of us. It's like the sense in which, like, yes, we are singing to God and we can name incredible attributes of God, and that's important. But I think we start and enter into that recognizing, I think, that we're coming from different places. There might be someone in the room who, is ready to go. They're prayed up, they're excited, they're all in right from the first moment. But frankly, we've got 5 kids. I know half the time we show up to church, we're just breathing for the first time because we couldn't get our kids to tie their shoes, and there was like yelling in the car and whatever else, and people are coming in from different places. Some are going to be at the back of the church, not sure why they're there, hanging on to faith by a thread, not, just kind of saying, I don't know what this is, but I'm here, And so Expecation was really just an intent, a prayer that my church needed, that I needed, that was really kind of saying, hey, you know what, wherever it is you're coming from in this moment, God meets us as we are. And we can come with expectation that Jesus will do what he says he will do and meet us. And so that's really all the song is. And it's actually going to be the opening track of the record for the same reason.
There was something you said wrote, typed with your thumbs maybe. But I wrote it down because I think for worship leaders, this is a very boiled down point. And it says, you're there for one reason, to be a human who makes it easier for others to engage in prayerful singing. Worship, especially right now, when I say worship or worship leaders, especially in churches, we've got so much technology, we've got social media. You can put out your album so quickly and easily and get spins and downloads and everything. When you bring it all back, that is what your one job really is, and said so plainly. I guess my question when it comes to that is, how do you encourage people to do that? That's actually hard.
Yeah, no, it is. It is, because there's a real temptation to kind of dehumanize the role and act as if, like, the thing is, we're coming together as a group of people we're coming together as a family, the bride of Christ, if you will, the church. We're not necessarily, I remember maybe 8 to 10 years ago, there was almost this push for, there was a few concerts that went out where the worship leaders were like invisible or behind a veil, or there's all these things. And it was sort of like interesting, but also really detached. And it was like, no, we're told, and we see this in Isaiah 53, we sing to each other and to God. This is just like the angels in heaven. I mean, that's kind of what we're doing. So there is a very human element to it. And so in a way, I'm almost sort of saying, hey, we need to humanize what we're doing here. We need to recognize that we're both people. And I think there's another distinction that I would make, although I tend to be careful with this language. We worship leaders probably need to see ourselves more as shepherds than shamans. We're not there to be the most holy person that everyone can look at. That's not the point. We are there to guide kindly, hopefully under the direction of the Holy Spirit, the person at the back of the room whose arms are crossed. The person at the front, they're in. They're ready to go. You're not there for them. They're gonna be all in no matter who is leading. But the one thing each of us as worship leaders brings to the table is the ability to connect with somebody in the room who feels disconnected and alienated from what's going on.
I think another thing to remember, and maybe this, one of the blessings or good things that's happened throughout COVID is the church has been able to grow as far as use of technology. Some churches have experienced a lot of growth in their numbers. Maybe new people are coming to church, people who aren't used to, haven't mastered. And I say this genuinely, figuring out how to join a worship service is a thing. Figuring out, what do I do? How does this work? What is worship for somebody who's there for the first time ever? And bringing that person to a place where they can express their heart, they can join the chorus and everything. That's a whole other assignment,
Yeah, it is, definitely. And I think sometimes we kind of act as if we need to make church not weird. But it's like, hey, let's be honest. We're coming together to sing songs to a man we believe is quite literally bodily resurrected elsewhere. Like the thing is weird. It starts out weird. So we may as well just kind of acknowledge, hey, this is weird, and be invitational rather than go out of our way to pretend it's not, because it is.
It's true. It is not. I mean, it's unprecedented. It's not normal. It doesn't happen every day. So
right.
You're right. This is there's a lot to get used to. I love what is happening right now for the church. It's a little messy. Granted, figuring out how to steward all of this. I love that people are burdened, that they have messages to help others. We're figuring this out. Man, I hope we can work out some of the kinks sooner rather than later.
Yeah, me too.
But that's where I think people, there's referencing your song before, there is a time to speak. And so some who have these messages are speaking. Elias is one of them. Let's talk a little bit about worship and the brain.
Sure.
I love this. So this isn't something people are really talking about a lot. There's a few books maybe that you could reference, and maybe you have some of them, but Elias was recently at the Worship Leader Magazine National Worship Leader Conference, and you spoke about this. And when I saw that you did, I thought, this is something we've got to talk about. Everybody's got a brain.
That's right.
So if we
Well,
can,
you hope so anyway. That's the
some people's spouses claim other. No, everybody does have one, and so if we can figure out how one impacts the other, man, this is going to get pretty good. So I'm ready to
Yeah.
geek out with you on this.
Okay,
Can you
awesome.
tell us the connection?
Yeah. Well, essentially, there's a lot of study that's been done in the last 15 years in neuroscience, and I've been a science geek for a long time. And I'll caution you now, if you're somebody who thinks that science is the enemy, this is probably not going to be the segment for you. But I really enjoy kind of what we've come to know about how we work, you know? And it has some really intriguing implications for the role that singing plays in worship, probably making it more vital and not less vital. And it's this, a couple things happen in group singing that are really substantial. I mean, one, your brain produces a bunch of dopamine. Dopamine is like your reward chemical. So it's the thing that tells you, yeah, keep doing this thing. And that sugar is another big dopamine producer. So dopamine's not always the best, but the idea is that dopamine tells you, yeah, this is a good thing, right? And then the other thing that singing together produces in great amounts is this hormone called oxytocin. Now, oxytocin is sometimes known as like the love hormone. So it's what happens when you hold your baby for the first time. It's what happens like on your first date. There's this kind of effect on people that has two really, really interesting impacts. One is that it deepens our social bonds with the people that we're with and with the object of the activity. And number two is that it produces altruism. So we've got in I think it's Matthew 22, Jesus says, hey, all of it boils down to this: love the Lord your God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. So with every facet of your being, not just your soul, but with your body, with your actions, with your words, love God with everything you got. And the second is just like it. And you could argue that the language there is suggesting that these two things are connected. Love your neighbor as yourself, which is altruism. So there's a sense in which so in the act of singing together itself out loud, like whether a choir or corporate worship, mechanically alone, Matthew 22 is being put into practice. We are being trained to live more Christ-like in some subtle way. And it's a pretty incredible thing, and another element of that is to do with how we learn, There's been a lot of research done in the last decade in particular on education and how we remember certain things. And there's one really, really interesting tidbit about that. A fact, the way that a memory works in your brain is that a fact doesn't kind of go into your brain and then pick a spot and live there. It's more distributed and spread out. So like the visual information of that fact lives in one area and the audio information lives in another, and the emotions that you had and the material facts, like what words were used and that sort of thing, they all live in different places, right? So when you remember something, your brain doesn't grab a memory, it grabs the things associated with that memory and puts it back together. It reconstructs the memory, right? So what does singing together and corporate worship do? It provides emotional, audio, visual information for the information that we're praying together or translating together. And so it just makes those memories so much more vivid and helps us to remember the things, which is why the Psalms are filled with that. Remember, 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 remember. That's kind of the whole point, is remembering the incredible things God has done in our lives and in history and in the church, and then helping us to remember them vividly to kind of deepen that sense while we put Matthew 22 into practice. So the truth is, worship is an incredibly powerful discipleship tool.
What about for people who don't feel like they are good singers?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's an interesting one too, because I think in a lot of ways, people watch things like American Idol or The Voice, and they think, well, singing is something that a specialist does somewhere else, right? That I'm not one of them. And I would encourage that person to sing anyway, in every case. The benefits outweigh the risks. If other people are singing, then they're probably not going to hear you anyway. But secondly, it is more weird that in our cultural moment, we don't sing than it is that people think they have to be a good, it's not how it works. Every human society until now, singing was a regular part of family life, of daily life. Some even theorized that we humans sang before we wrote down or spoke, that there's, because of the way that singing and melodies and our emotions and trust seem to have to do with each other. So singing is a normal human function that we've made special, which is kind of okay in a sense. Like, it's great that we have incredible singers. But at the same time, everyone can sing on some level, even if they can't hit the notes. They can make noise.
Make noise. Do you think that, let's say if someone sings sparingly, is the impact that it has on their brain the same as if they would, belt it out like whoever is on stage on American Idol?
Yeah. I mean, I think there is and this has been well studied. There is a connection between our body language and what we're doing and how we interpret the activity we're participating in. So, I mean, there's one of the most watched TED Talks of all time is Amy Cuddy's talk on body language. And so she's talking about it in a sales environment, for example, the idea that you'd go in and you'd puff up and you'd make yourself into the person that you intend to be in the room, right? And that tends to have a positive effect on your performance even, but also your own interpretation and perception of what you're doing, like what you're taking part in. So the reality is, worship, yes, body language doesn't matter to God. I believe that's true. God isn't all that interested in our body language. However, God made us, and we, even if we don't think we are consciously, we are subconsciously deeply interested in our body language, and our perception of what we're doing is often shaped by the way that we're approaching it. And so I think going in with gusto is always better, because it's telling yourself, no, I mean this. And in that in and of itself can be a spiritual discipline, but your body's used to interpreting the things you do based on how you're standing, how you're acting, and how you're engaging the thing.
I think sometimes also those symbols, lifting your hands or whatever else, can be very meaningful. They can demonstrate something. They can, it all kind of works together. I'm just thinking of the book that Chris Tomlin, the book Chris Tomlin did. There's all these it's really interesting to think through these little things, but the heart of it is going in with gusto. That is a wholehearted way to approach God with worship.
Totally. Heart, soul, mind, and strength, right?
Yeah,
like we're
exactly.
not to love God with a subtle melody. We're to love God with every facet of our being. That's what we're told to do. And so I think it's connected. And like you said, things like raising your hands and these sorts of things, these are universal actions. We do them at sports. We do them at other concerts. I mean, the idea of we're lifting something up or celebrating something or holding something out, the hand actions that you think of as being associated with worship, we do elsewhere. It's actually more weird that we think it's weird in church.
We think it's it's really hard. That's a strange hurdle, for sure. I'm curious. So with worship / singing having effect on the brain, how does that change or impact what you do? The way that you do what you do, knowing that this can have these kinds of benefits and effects on people. What does that do for you?
It changes how I write songs. It makes me think about what we ought to be singing with some seriousness. That's quite the mantle. You're giving people the prayers that they're going to pray and most likely remember most. And so if you're doing that, that's quite the responsibility, So I feel that. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because in a sense, I mean, the reality is people can work themselves up and get into an ecstatic experience on the mechanisms alone. And so we have to be saying, hey, why am I doing this? What am I doing? Where's the Holy Spirit? What is the Holy Spirit doing? Both in a sense of, is the Holy Spirit wanting to do something unique today? But also recognizing that if we've truly encountered God in our time of worship, then I should hope that over time we see the fruit of the Spirit. We've all been to many places where people seem to be very into something, and yet you don't see love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. You don't. And so I think, we have to be asking those questions and saying, who are we becoming like, in this process? So as a worship leader, I really think that's ultimately the job. I know that that may not be the most common description of it, but in a lot of ways, that's what the church is doing every time we do anything as the church, is making disciples of Jesus and loving God with all that we've got and loving our neighbor just like it. So if you're going to boil it down to anything, the worship leading is no different than the calling on the Christian dentist or whatever.
Oh, I want to talk for 10, 15 minutes about the calling on my dad was a dentist.
That's amazing.
He's recently retired, Christian dentist my whole life. I could talk about that for a long time. That's really funny.
Great.
His favorite hymn, of course, crown him with many crowns. You know, we could go on.
That's great.
Anyway, I'm curious, how did this go over when you were talking about with worship leaders at the conference? How did this whole topic go over in that room?
Really, really well. I half anticipated. I started out by basically apologizing up front and saying, "Hey, I'm going to be talking a lot of science for the next little bit. If you are, like I said, sort of in this interview, like if you're somebody who thinks that science is a problem to be fixed, and yes, there are limitations to what science can tell us, absolutely. But if you're somebody who thinks that science is evil in some way, you may want to leave now." And nobody left, and they were really into it. And I had a lot of great questions, and people came and sought me out after to discuss the topic and all that kind of stuff. And I guess I'm slowly realizing that not a lot of people are talking about this, and I probably should have been more aware of that. But it's been a lot of fun to talk about, and I don't know, there seems to be a lot of interest in it as well.
I mean, I think it's fascinating. Did I even ask? Did I miss any of the really good questions? Is there anything more to know about this connection between worship and the brain?
Well, I think probably the one thing is actually a bit of a philosophical observation, but one that's true probably for everybody, which is that one of the most important things to recognize about humans in general is that there is a gap between information that we learn and our behavior. A very, very simple exercise is to think nobody believes McDonald's is good for them, but most people can name a number of times in recent history that they've been to McDonald's. I mean, no one is thinking, well, this time the Big Mac is good for me. It's nutritious and I'm going to be better off as a result. Nobody thinks that, but we do it anyway, right? And so I think there's something to be said for recognizing that the chief driver for most of what we do is love, desire, and identity before it is the information we've been presented with. So there's a lot to be said for our remembering and training our heart to love God with all that we are as being a better predictor of how we're going to act when we leave than simply being presented with a few facts about it.
That brings up something that I actually I've loved and have learned more as I've gone through life, right? This whole idea of when I was younger, I thought it was faking it if you would worship when you didn't feel like worshiping.
Right. Yeah. The
right?
question of authenticity becomes a big
exactly.
one for sure. Yes.
Very important to be genuine. But at the same time, that's not the way it works,
Right. Well, imagine how bad every mother would be if they expressed every emotion that they felt every time their kids did something.
True.
And that mother's not being inauthentic. She's authentically being who she wants to be. That's the difference. And along those lines, I mean, worship leaders get really hung up about the word performance for the same reason. But the thing is, the irony of it is the word performance is legitimately a Christian word. So the original word was Church Latin, performo, and it meant to form thoroughly. So in a sense, not fake it till you make it, but like do the thing that you think is the right, whole, God-loving thing to do enough that you're formed by it. And in a lot of ways, that's what worship leading is. So you can't separate worship leading and performance any more than you can separate day-to-day living or parenting and performance, because there are times when you do the thing you don't want to do. You're thinking, I would rather yell at my kid, or I would rather do this other thing right now. But no, you do the right thing and you try to do it lovingly. And over time, you become more like that person.
Yeah, exactly. I do think there's a discipline in coming, in coming in worship and deciding to worship, bringing, you can call it a sacrifice of praise if you need to, but it does become something beautiful. And if you didn't feel it by the end of the song or the service, it was still beautiful that you were able to bring yourself to that place.
Totally. One comparison I make a lot is to brushing your teeth, and people always get grossed out by this, but like, imagine
the dentist stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they're great metaphors. Yeah. Imagine if the only time brushing your teeth worked was when you especially enjoyed it. like, like who would, but it's a habit, right? It's an invisible habit. It's something you just do. And yet that habit makes a difference. And is it exciting? No. I mean, the commercials for automated toothbrushes might say so, but the reality is it's not. You're just brushing your teeth. But you come out the other end going, yeah, that was better for me than if I hadn't, you know? And I think in a lot of ways, we kind of put a pressure on worship to be this ecstatic moment every time. And that's not true. It's not always going to be that, but it is always worth it and worthwhile.
And you know what? I'm going to roll with this analogy because it's speaking to me. I feel like there is a part of when you worship that is like a sonic toothbrush that has a way of getting to the debris in the cracks of the unseen places in your soul. I'm not joking. I think
that's great.
And I think that it does have that function and that capability.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to find songs that help them to worship through, we're pandemic, people are having relationship, there's political, there's financial, there's all kinds of reasons why you might feel really not like singing or worshiping. But here are the reasons you can consider that it's really, really good for you.
Yeah, totally. One, I think that's also something for us, and Expecation is a song that tries to say it that way. I'll be honest, I don't know that we're trying all that hard to do that as worship leaders and worship writers. I think we could be trying harder to not just having, I think there's a tendency in our writing to expect that people will just look past whatever, which makes it a form of escapism. And that's not the same thing as cleaning up. I think sometimes we need to process through prayer what we're going through and what we might be going through. People have talked about this for years, but I think we really undersell the importance of lament and processing our pain in prayer in song. I mean, most of the Psalms have some component that could be described as lament. And I don't know that it can be said that most of the songs that we're singing in church have the same. I think most of them tend to look past whatever it is that's going on in the real world, as if what we're there to do isn't in the real world. And I think that's a problem. And of course I can't write every song that way, but certainly try to make sure that that's the case in some of them. And not that they're depressing necessarily, but that we can at least see our real lives in what we're doing in church. And so that's certainly what I've been trying to do anyway.
That's awesome. And you're right. If we would compare on some kind of color-coded spectrum, the lyrics of the songs of today, I feel like you almost turn up the volume on the positive, while, hoping that it just drowns out.
Hoping that it just drowns it out or helps us to forget.
Right. Or maybe it heals something so that it's not a problem anymore.
Right. I think there's a little bit of hopeful attitude like that. And I think sometimes that there's a degree to which that's true.
Right.
But clearly we have the songbook of the Bible. And it seems evident that the songbook of the Bible didn't take that approach. So that's, I want to be careful that we don't ever assign a rule to what we're doing in leading worship and in writing worship songs that would fail the Bible. And I think there's been plenty of those, frankly, even just thinking of personal pronouns and stuff like that. There's a mix of I and they and we throughout the Psalms. So I think we have to be careful to say, hey, can't be a hard and fast rule, because frankly, we'd be failing the Bible at its own, the Bible's songbook at its own thing. It doesn't make sense. So I don't know. I feel, like I said earlier, I feel a pressure in a responsibility in a good way as a writer of songs that some people sing at their churches. I feel that mantle of, hey, I'm helping people process and pray together. And so there's a double-edged sword of needing it to be both accessible to most people in the room, but specific enough that it feels like it hits home. And so sometimes that's done well through poetry. And I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about art and making art. But that's kind of the goal. Yeah. With Expecation, we really just tried to name all of the ages and stages of life and pains and joys and, the identifying emotion, if you will, of what comes along with them. So that people could go, yeah, I get that. I get. And if that's speaking to me, then I can come here too.
Elias, I love that you're pointing out these things, that these things are going through your brain and that you're finding a way to communicate them so clearly. I can't wait to hear the new project, The Work Volume 2, coming later this year, hopefully. And I know you've got a good group of people in on the production and the writing.
Yes,
and
definitely.
Yeah, all of that. So thrilled for that. Expectation is out available now. Wouldn't hurt to also follow it up with The Time to Dance and to keep up with Elias on all of the other things, because there are chord charts and all of this stuff. So check him out on social media too. Elias, thanks for chatting today.
Oh, thanks, Kristi. This was really fun.